Sometimes, you have to be firm with them, by user Nodiawarnani. One of our stores had a power outage. Not a huge deal, it happens, we can deal. Due to some recent work on the network, however, we didn't have everything in the network closet running on the UPS, yet, and when the power came back on, the SDWAN box, the one single point of failure, didn't boot up correctly. It would route WAN traffic, but not LAN. Note, when we upgrade our phones to VoIP, we pull cable for each phone, separate from the computer network, so the phones are entirely outside of our network. More expensive, but there are reasons, and good ones. The SDWAN box thus has, or, rather, uses, 2 LAN ports, one for us, one for the phones. Our telecom provider had, of course, detected the outage and automatically opened a ticket. They detected that the SDWAN was back up, and closed the ticket. The store was still offline, and was less than 100% efficient at letting me know, but when they did, they told me the phones were still down as well. This was the second store this exact thing had happened at in 2 weeks, and the first one took an on-site visit by a tech to reconfigure the SDWAN box. This was late on a Friday. Once I found out, I reopened the ticket, and explained that with the phones down as well, it has to be the SDWAN box that's acting up. They looked at it, saw the SDWAN was showing as online, couldn't see our firewall behind it, and closed it again. We show you're online in the orchestrator. Sigh. So I reopened it a second time, made it clear we were still offline, and so are the phones, which are outside of our network, same result, same message, word for word, closed again. This is Saturday afternoon. We've been offline for 2 days at this point, which is painful, but not a huge deal, but the phones have been down as long, and that is a big deal. So, okay, we're a 6-figure a year account, with about 24 locations now, with a platinum support team, so I emailed our account rep and asked her to escalate the ticket. It was Saturday afternoon by this point, so I didn't actually expect a quick response. I was wrong. Less than 5 minutes, I get CC'd on the message to the escalation team. And less than 2 minutes after that, I get an email from the escalation team. Woohoo! Things are happening. The SDWAN is up. I do not see your internal network equipment switches/routers/firewalls. Yeah, things are happening, but all progress is backwards. For the 4th time, the phones are not working. The phones are not on our network. They go through a separate switch that plugs directly into the SDWAN. There is no part of our network that can affect phone service. The SDWAN is not communicating with its own LAN side. For the 4th time, this is the exact same thing that happened after a power outage at another location last week that required an on-site visit to reconfigure the SDWAN because the configuration got corrupted by the power outage. I did get an apology after that, and he was able to get into the box remotely and get it working in less than half an hour, unlike the previous incident. I guess there are advantages to being a big fish in a medium-sized pond, and they're better than any other phone or internet company I've dealt with, but there are times. Tales from the Dollar Facility, Part 16, Where the Heart Is, by user_cartographer. Hello one final time, y'all, smiley face. This is my last from the Dollar Facility, wherein I talk about how things have gone since the rollout. All of this is from the best of my memory along with some personal records, and I have started taking notes specifically so I can write stories for TFTs. There's also a lot that comes from rumors, gossip, and other people, but most of this is very recent, so any inaccuracies are entirely on me. Also, I don't give permission for anyone else to use this. TL/DR, it's also where the Wi-Fi connects automatically. For some context, I'm not in IT, rather, I'm a GIS, Geographic Information Systems, professional. This particular world is quite small, so I will do what I can to properly anonymize my tale. However, for reference, all these stories take place at my new job working as the GIS manager at the Dollar Facility, a major industrial entity in the American South. Here's my dramatis personae for this part. Oh, you thought I was done, huh? Nope. There's still more work to do, so one last story, smiley face. I recall someone saying that MBAs are always concerned that folks who do techy things, coding, programming, IT work, the like, will eventually get done and put themselves out of a job. The techy types never respond, mostly because they are laughing so hard they can barely breathe. So it is with GIs. Just because I'd finished my rollout in no way meant I was done. If you ever want job security, learn how to do GIs. You'll be creating, maintaining, and updating GI's data for years without running out of things to do. Seriously, my intern, Civility, has been here about a month. I've already showed her a dozen GI's postings in our area that have gone up in that time alone. In the weeks and months after the GI's rollout, I addressed a ton of questions and requests that folks had regarding the system. We kept updating things based on their recommendations. I deployed things to additional users. I also created tons of new data, mostly information related to security, property boundaries, publicly available datasets, and environmental data. Speaking of environmental data, we wound up hiring a new environmental manager, Masked Hero. One of his first tasks was something required by the regulatory agencies in this area. He needed to place physical no trespassing signs around the edges of one of our mitigation sites. Basically, this was a physical deterrent to make sure any trespassers knew they were coming onto our property. On top of that, the regulatory agency needed exact coordinates as to where each of these signs was located. Sounds like a GI's task to me, muhahaha. Gives Mr. Burns look. I don't know why I tried to make that seem evil. Anyways, I created a web map for us to collect all this data and we headed out to the site. We trudged through the swamps and marshes with the Musketeer and Bower Bro to place all these signs. It was exhausting, but we did it. At each site, I used field maps to place a point in our AGOL environmental web map, attaching a photo to each point of exactly what the sign looked like when we posted it up. Pretty cool. However, while we were out there, we found ample evidence of poaching and trespassing. There were deer stands, feeder stations, and trail cameras everywhere, most of it either on our property or pointed towards our property. Not cool. Masked Hero said he'd come by later to pull all that stuff down. The Musketeer said he'd get his crews to disassemble the big stuff, like the deer stands. I thanked them for doing that. After all, we didn't really want people with guns hiding out on our mitigation sites, especially if we needed to get staff down there. Anyways, as we traversed the marshes, I wound up falling in several times. I'm not the most physically fit guy, working in an office for the past 15 years will do that to you. I did my best to keep up, and I did manage to collect all the data we needed. But when we finally walked around the entire perimeter of the site, arriving back at one of the trailheads, I was exhausted. I asked my fellow crew if they would be alright if I just waited here for a few minutes and caught them as they headed back out in the truck. Bower Bro laughed and said that'd be no problem. They started walking down the trail, leaving me sitting there on a log. A few minutes later, I could have sworn I heard voices. I looked up from where I was sitting, and right inside the forest, directly across the clearing from me, was a deer stand. I heard the voices again, low, male, at least 2, and I took off running. I ran at least half a mile down the trail, despite being tired. Nope, not taking any chances when hanging out next to a deer stand with a couple of trespassers toting rifles right near me. Anyways, a few minutes later, the crews picked me up. I let them know what I'd heard. Bower Bro said that I probably heard some folks in a nearby neighborhood, but it sounded way closer than that. I was just happy to get out of there after all this. A few days later, Masked Hero headed back out to the site with a team and took down all the poaching equipment they found. Almost immediately, we were contacted by the owner of that equipment, an entitled jerk we will now refer to as Retired Idiot. His initial call to the facility was a self-righteous diatribe about how we had stolen his stuff, interspersed with profanity-laced demands for his things back. The response my leadership was some variation of the following. Facility staff, oh, so that was you. Thanks for letting us know. We'll be initiating the trespassing charges now. The most surprised of all Pikachus. Retired Idiot tried to fight us on all this, actually. He had been hired by a nearby property owner to keep wildlife numbers down. But he apparently hadn't given 2SHTS as to where he was setting up. I was able to use my cool new GI stuff to pinpoint exactly where his equipment had been located and definitively prove that it was on our property. And Retired Idiot seemed to think he could get away with far more than he was actually able to. With some of the cameras we'd put up, and I'd referenced in GIs, we caught him trespassing back out on our property a few weeks later, even after we'd served him with a notice. An analog fool in these digital days. His contract with that other group was terminated, we gave him back his SHT, and we told him that if we ever caught him on our property again, he'd be arrested. Haven't seen him since, laughing face. This hasn't been all that I've been able to help with. Thanks to me continuing to work with other departments across the facility, I've been gradually spreading the word on what I'm able to do across the whole enterprise. Many of my fellow staff have realized that I don't just make maps, I'm able to do all sorts of geographic analysis and asset management as well. Well, this got back to the CEO, actually. Late last year, she asked me to build an entire management system for a particular classification of assets we have in our buildings across the various campuses. I was so stoked when I heard she wanted to actually pull me into a project. I let her know that I'd get to work on this as soon as I could. It took me many long months, but I eventually got it done. I went live with this asset system only a few days ago. We have a meeting with the CEO to go over this project about a month from now. FTW, y'all. But my final success has been the one that I am most proud of. In the wake of Dollarnerco's failure, I had several other engineering firms reach out to me to try and help me construct a GIS inventory. For the vast majority, a cursory discussion with their dev teams revealed that they didn't know what the H3LL they were talking about. However, one person contacted me that I thought very highly of. This guy had worked with me in the past. I'd always had a high opinion of him. He had never overpromised and was always trying to help me out with the most applicable support in his previous roles. He had even been the one to nominate me for one of the huge awards I'd received. Despite being well disposed to work with him, though, the issues I'd encountered with Ryan and Nercio weighed heavily on my mind. When I spoke to him, I told this guy that I wanted to see an example of what they could do, prior to me setting up an official project. Namely, I wanted to assess their work on a pilot project, having them create GIS features for a small area over a specific asset category, in this case, water features. The team seemed okay with this. We got things put together, I hammered out all the legalese, and they started work. This guy even told me that they'd expected to do this project for free. I told him that I'd never ask that of anyone. If you're doing work for me, I'm paying you for it. 13th Amendment and all. Anyways, we got started on our project. We did an actual attribution data review, and they were very, very thorough. While I'm sure they were trying to get my business, I was particularly impressed with how much attention to detail they were showing. Their staff was excellent. It was clear they had worked in this sort of field before, and they all asked pertinent questions as we progressed through everything. I was cautiously optimistic as we got closer to the deliverable date. During the process, however, we had a few disruptions. The team assigned to this pilot project lived in western North Carolina and central Florida. If you'll recall, in the latter half of last year, both of those areas were hammered with hurricanes. Yet despite this, the team told me they'd probably be delayed a week or so. And they were true to their word, too. They wound up getting me a final draft within a week of their original deliverable date. I downloaded it and opened it with some trepidation. Despite having good feelings about this company, you never know what the data looks like until you receive it. I added everything to my Pro project, and opened the attribute table. And lo and behold, it was complete. At least 95% of the attribution was there, and represented well and accurately. The only things missing were data elements that they had no way of knowing, due to not having primary sources, or data that I specifically told them not to worry about. The company had even attached .pdf drawings of all the as-builts to each individual feature, indicating where they had found this data. This meant that any person selecting a record could instantly see the engineering drawing where that data came from. I hadn't even asked for this, but the company had used it to ensure they could draw things accurately. It just so happened to be immensely helpful for me and my team, as well. Hallelujah, y'all! I had found my unicorn, laughing face. We'll refer to this company as the Unicorn from here on out. I took the data they gave me, uploaded it into AGOL, then created a web map specifically for my engineering, facilities, and maintenance teams. We had our first meeting to go over it shortly after the data was delivered. The crews were immensely happy. They could now select every water line throughout the campus and see every single detail that ever mattered to them. Diameter, material, length, install date, depth below the surface, you name it. I talked to them about how we could use this map to record our fire hydrant testing results, and they were stoked. All in all, incredibly well received. The crews have come to me constantly asking about what can be added into this system and what else they can use it for. With this, I had found the company I needed more than any other. The company that could help me complete the rest of the GI's inventory for the entirety of the facility. Thanks the Unicorn, y'all are the best. I doubt I could ever express how happy all of this has made me. And it's allowed me to recognize how much I've managed to do here. What I'm doing has value here, y'all. People are using it, day after day. I've gotten through most of the hurdles. And what we're going to create is just going to keep skyrocketing in the months and years to come. Remember that challenge I set before myself, all those years ago? That the GI's architecture at the dollar facility would be a model for other folks in this industry across the country one day? I truly think we'll get there, smiley face. A few months ago, we had a huge snowstorm here. As you're probably aware, particularly those of you from the north, a snowstorm in a major southern city is basically the end of the world. Cats and dogs, living together, mass hysteria. Predictably, the metro prepped to shut down entirely. Grocery stores completely sold out of bread, eggs, and milk. Whatever. Anyways, the day that the storm was to hit, I asked the gentleman if I could head home a bit early. It was looking like the roads would start icing up soon and I lived very far from the office. The gentleman said no problem and wished me well in the storm. I drove off from the headquarters building. It started sleeting on me almost immediately. A little harrowing for my southern sensibilities, but I drove cautiously, avoided getting too close to others, and tried to pay attention to the road. I was able to make it back to my neighborhood without any incident. As I pulled up into my driveway, I let out a little sigh of audible relief. It was good to be home. I walked inside and flopped down on the couch, thinking about what had just gone through my mind. It's good to be home. Is that really what I thought? After letting that simmer in my brain for a while, with the snow pouring down outside, I started to smile. Yeah, it was. This isn't just the place I live, the place where I have a house. I've met tons of friends here. I've done some awesome things here. I've made a name for myself here. It took me a long time to get to this place. But this is definitely my home now, laughing face, for now, at least. Thanks for reading, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed the stories. I'll be back with more before too long, and I promise they won't be years into the future. So until next time, don't forget to turn it off and on again. Here are some of my other stories on TFTs, if you're interested. The Dollar Facility Series, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, Part 6, Part 7, Part 8, Part 9, Part 10, Part 11, Part 12, Part 13, Part 14, Part 15. MR_Cartographer's Atlas, Volume I. Tales from the Dollar Facility, Part 15, The Rollout, by user_cartographer. Hello yet again, y'all. This is my next story from the Dollar Facility, wherein I officially roll out the GI's architecture. All of this is from the best of my memory along with some personal records, and I have started taking notes specifically so I can write stories for TFTs. There's also a lot that comes from rumors, gossip, and other people, but most of this is very recent, so any inaccuracies are entirely on me. Also, I don't give permission for anyone else to use this. TL/DR, it always seems impossible, until you manage to get it done. For some context, I'm not an IT, rather, I'm a GIS, Geographic Information Systems, professional. This particular world is quite small, so I will do what I can to properly anonymize my tale. However, for reference, all these stories take place at my new job working as the GI's manager at the Dollar Facility, a major industrial entity in the American South. Here's my dramatis personae for this part. By this point in my career, I had been at the Dollar Facility for over 2 years. We had now created a ton of applications and inventory items for GIs in our AGOL environment. I had specially designed apps that were currently being used by departments all across the organization. I had a workable file server system in a very structured architecture. I had static maps that were in use all across the enterprise. I would even find my maps printed out by people I didn't even know. There were dynamic maps in the hands of different departmental business units, and people were coming to me with mapping and analysis projects all the time. It was time to solidify this into an actual output. A legitimate rollout of this system, a production environment where people could use and view all the resources I'd created in a single place. To get started, I spoke with one of my contractors, $Old Reliable. They had worked for me back when I'd been at the municipality, and once I'd started here, and run into countless issues with other contractors, I called them up. They were on an on-call support contract with me, meaning I could work with them for general support up to a certain dollar amount each year. After conversing with their devs, we brainstormed some ways for us to provide all this out to the users. I thought that it might be a good idea to develop an AGOL hub site, one that could only be accessed by internal Dollar Facility users. After some discussion, the devs agreed. So we got to work. The first thing I did was start trying to build this site. I took a stab at it and realized, almost immediately, that I was in YAAI over my head. Like, gone to plaid beyond me. Even though Hub had a user-friendly configurable card GUI, there were a ton of nested elements that I didn't understand. And ultimately, I'm just a GIS professional and a cartographer, y'all. I'm not a web designer. So I reached back out to $old Reliable. They were more than willing to, especially considering that I would pay them to do so, lol. Anyways, we worked together for a couple of weeks to set up something. I helped establish configuration settings and provided them with design ideas. But overall, I left things up to them. I didn't want to micromanage them. How many of y'all have been cooking up something really awesome when your client decides to put their greasy hands in the pot? Yeah, I didn't want to be that guy. Around midsummer, $old Reliable got in touch with me saying they wanted to show me the draft they'd put together. We reviewed it, and it looked fantastic. It still needed a lot of work, but this initial draft was incredibly promising. As the contractors continued their work, I set about on other things. I knew that we would need staff to actually provide this thing to, and they would need GIS licenses for that to happen. Those were in limited supply, unfortunately. However, I also wanted the folks who could access this to be from a broad section of departments here, folks that I hoped could use this new GIS data to help them in their work. As such, I spoke to my boss, Distinguished, to see if we could set up a GIS working group. This would be a pilot group of users from a ton of different departments, including IT, finance, operations, maintenance, administration, facilities, security, and so on. Distinguished was okay with this, but he did tell me that I should check with their supervisors to make sure they had no issue with this being provided to them. So I went around to a dozen or so departments, speaking with the supervisors for each of the people on my list. Not a single one turned me down, they all seemed excited to see this stuff in action. Win, smiley face. I had my pilot group. Now, we needed to finalize the website. And there were some issues cropping up with some of the apps we'd been building. The first problem was one of my making. When I first started creating applications for my users, I utilized an old ArcGIS app development product called Web App Builder. Well, as it turns out, this particular product was due to be deprecated in late 2025. We would need to rebuild everything in the new app development suite, called Experience Builder, or risk EOL issues. $old Reliable's devs and I worked together to update everything to the new app suite. It took us a few weeks, and some functionality wasn't available. It's not a bug, it's a feature, but by the end I was reasonably pleased with what we had created. A little bit of success, one step at a time, Montage.png. The next problem was with Hub site itself. As I found out, when you embed web maps into ArcGIS Hub, selecting them doesn't actually take you into the AGOL map viewer application. Instead, it takes you to the details page in the GUIO database, and the user has to find the Open in Map Viewer button to actually access the item. Not cool. I'd already had enough trouble getting my users to actually do the stuff I wanted them to do with apps I'd already provided to them. Adding an extra step, and a step that potentially would allow them access to the GUIO database, which I very much did not want, was something I wanted to quash as much as possible. I mean, how many of you have had your users click through 6 different warning messages and send a MFA push just so they could press the one button you specifically told them not to? Yep. So, once again, it was time to rebuild some things. I worked with the devs at $old Reliable for a while, and we were able to come up with a solution. As it turns out, if a web map is added to an experience, via Experience Builder, and the experience item is embedded into an ArcGIS Hub page, then selecting the item will take the user straight to the app, bypassing the item details altogether. Doing this would require that we create experiences for each of the web maps that I wanted to embed, but that wasn't too big of an issue. This would allow a completely seamless navigation of the website. I worked with them to go ahead and build everything. By the end of the summer, all of the items on the website appeared to be good by my eyes. It looked great and there was a lot of information for the users to access. It was time to launch, laughing face. I set a date when we would go live with the GIS working group. I would have a big meeting in one of our largest conference rooms to accommodate them all. There were about 50 users we'd be provisioning this for, so I needed to make sure we had enough physical space. I requested that the devs from $old Reliable be on site for the launch. And I did a couple of tests with some users to make sure they could access everything, and to see if they had any questions. We addressed their comments quickly. The site was ready to go. Schedules were ironed out. The invites were sent. We were ready. Too soon and not soon enough, the launch day arrived. My contractors arrived on site that morning. I took them around the building to introduce them to the different departments. We had a couple of design meetings with some special interest groups, and Old Reliable managed to get some good feedback. The rollout meeting was scheduled just before lunch, though. Within short order, we headed down to the massive training room on the first floor of the headquarters building. Most of the people I had invited were there. The room was pretty full. I had made sure to dress nicely that day. I straightened my tie as I stepped to the podium at the front of the room. This was it. As I've told you all before, once it's time to perform, the nerves tend to leave me. And they did this time, too. Smiley face. We went over everything. I showed them all how to access the site. I loaded up the various assets they could access, showing them applications, web maps, Survey 123 forms, dashboards, and all the rest. I showed them how they could access the file server for some of our static maps if they needed them. I illustrated how to use the Nearmap map browser application that we had gained access to, showing them how to edit, create, and mark up simple maps to use in their work. We answered some anticipated questions. I told them the schedule for rolling this out to each individual department, and so on. And at the end, I took a step back, and asked them if they had anything for me. Of all the things I had done to this point, this was where I was most worried. I had worked hard on this. I hoped that it would be applicable to everybody here. I'd involved them all throughout the process, and made them aware of what I was producing for them. But this was the measure of it, so far, the measure of everything I had worked on at this job to this point. What would they think? Would they even care? I looked over to my fellow engineers from the engineering department. Many of them didn't have very enthusiastic looks on their faces. I had discovered that they thought I'd been focusing my efforts too much on other departments, and not enough on data that they wanted. I'd tried to let them know that I was investing huge amounts of money into vendors to help me with those engineering tasks, and all this assistance to other departments was to make sure that GIs stayed relevant here at the Dollar facility. Would that hold water with them now? Truth be told, I was actually pretty nervous. The worst thing I thought could happen was that they wouldn't ask any questions, and would just get up and leave. What did they think? Y'all, what does worry get you? A whole lot of nothing. And it got me a whole lot of nothing here, too. I shouldn't have worried at all. Things went swimmingly, laughing face. I was immediately bombarded with questions from throughout the audience. There were folks coming up to me saying, "Hey, can we use this for this task? And can you get this to other user, and other user?" Even the engineers seemed happy with what I had provided once they got a chance to talk to me. My inbox was flooded over the following week with people asking about all this. I was ecstatic. One of my worst fears was that people wouldn't care, and that couldn't be further from the case. Sweet. We wound up getting about 60 plus users set up within a week. I needed its help in doing so. It was a lot of people. There was so much demand that I had to purchase 60 more AGOL licenses within a month of the rollout. I checked my access statistics yesterday. At least half the user base checks in to use something in this system every week, most doing so within a day or so of when I review my statistics. Freaking awesome, a far cry from having literally nothing in GIs at the Dollar facility only a few years ago. At the end of every week, we have an engineering report that we have to update. It is a big collaborative SharePoint document where we list the progress of the various projects we're working on. Ever since I had started, there was an item under my section of the report entitled GI's Implementation. The week after we completed this rollout, I was able to write the following under that section. GI's Implementation. Project complete. The most satisfying thing I have ever written. Woohoo! But that's not all, of course. I have one final story for you. You'll get to read it tomorrow. Until then, y'all take care. Here are some of my other stories on TFTs, if you're interested. The Dollar Facility Series, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4, Part 5, Part 6, Part 7, Part 8, Part 9, Part 10, Part 11, Part 12, Part 13, Part 14, Part 16. MR_Cartographers Atlas, Volume I.